Now, the issue of caring for senior citizens has surfaced as a pressing concern amidst various challenges. With an aging population, the need for proper elderly care services has become increasingly evident. However, the existing infrastructure and resources for senior citizen care in the country are inadequate, leading to a gap in meeting the needs of this vulnerable demographic. Despite the challenges, efforts are being made to improve the care and support available to senior citizens in Nigeria.
This trade will die out. Look at our aging subsistence farmers. We are now clustering them in cooperatives and leverage the cooperatives to bring health insurance. Bringing WASH, we enter a community that's NSCC, sector-wide approach that we will share with you. You enter a community, you go with all the partners, nobody left behind. So that by the time we leave that community, that impact will be there and their children will continue.
Some communities sadly look at the old as a burden or even as a liability, where they are stigmatized and even tormented for just being blessed by God to achieve what we are all seeking to achieve, which is age, and they are accused of all forms of witchcraft and whatever.
The wisdom of the framers of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 10, on reduced inequalities within and among countries, sits neatly within the mandate of the center. And about 70% of the target talks about or address issues of vulnerability. And I think about 50% discuss issues on inclusivity.
Right, let's bring in Director General, National Senior Citizens Center, Emem, Omokaro, and in our Lagos studio, Damilola Grillo, who is the co-chair of the National Senior Citizens Center, Lagos State. Thank you, both of you. Incidentally, you're both ladies and you don't look elderly in in any way or form. But let's start with you, Madam DG. What really informed the convergence of the National Center for the Elderly? Let me just put it that way. We'll all understand what I'm talking about. And of course, the commissioners from 36 states right here in the FCT. What has informed this gathering?
Thank you very much for having me and giving us this opportunity to share the progress we're making. Of course, you know that older persons actually reside in the states. 70% of them are in the rural areas. And the National Senior Citizen Center has over these years, worked to develop systems and mechanisms and policies, broken it down into plan of actions, pilot tested the programs, done needs assessment. And now it's time for us to move into the states. And one thing that is common amongst persons who deal with older persons is the pessimistic perception of old age. Is the fact that older persons, they are spent. Right. Their abilities are discounted. And so issues of older persons, programs of older persons are only seen as token welfare, palliatives. So there's really no sustainable program, income security initiative. You do not have health and social care quality programs. You do not have work schemes for older people. It is assumed that population aging is not related to economic growth. It is assumed that older persons really do not have anything more to contribute. Whereas statistics show that older persons in the communities, if you take the aging artisans, you take the aging subsistence farmers, in any area you look at aging, even look at our retired professionals, our retired technocrats, what we have done now is to create programs that will speak to the broad spectrum, the diverse population of older people. And the older persons in the community, yes, palliative is okay. It helps. But a life of dignity is what they want. So it is to contribute and empower them. The activities are there. Empower them with, grants, empower them with, access to raw materials, empower them with markets, and then even off-takers. So that is what NSCC has done. And we just thought it's time to bring in all the commissioners, not just the commissioners, we also brought in the technical people, directors of social welfare from across this country. And we were able to share the vision, the mission, and then it was also consultative. Because, of course, as a state government, they have their independent legislation. Yeah. So to consult with them, how best can we partner? How best can we translate what we have into your own subnational policy architecture so that we can work together for the benefit of our older persons?
Let me bring in Damilola Grillo here. And, sometimes it's a shame that we're talking about this because as Africans, one would have thought that we are a communal people. We talk about the elderly, we take care of our own, and we take care of ourselves. How much of neglect have we seen from the government, subnational, across the country, to the extent that this is coming as a big conversation?
So, good evening and thank you for having me. It's great to also see the DJ is on here, which is coincidental. So, neglect of older people across the nation is very, very glaring, but it's like we are not bringing the awareness forward as much as we should. But the National Senior Citizen Center has really, really done a lot on, creating awareness on neglect and abandonment of older people. Across nations, I can talk about Lagos State, where we do not even have age-friendly areas for our older people to live or to navigate. We have this pedestrian bridges, older people would want to cross, and then there's even no people to help them around or assist them. So there are so many areas where neglect comes in place for older people. And like the DJ has said, this pessimistic attitude of old age, and it is unfortunate because all of us are going to grow old at some day or some year, except if you pray that you don't want to grow old. And like we say, in Africa, we revere our old people. We're supposed to take care of our old people. But with the recent, migration going on, everybody is jackbuying, leaving their older people behind. The neglect and abandonment is increasing by the day, and we need the government, we need the private sector, we need everybody to come in agreement, work towards having a solid structure for our older generation as we grow in the country. And also, we shouldn't always have at the back of our minds that, okay, everything has to be done for the youth or for the children or other demography of people that we have. The older people to us are important, and whatever we're doing, we should always have it in our mind that we are going to grow old, and whatever it is that we sow now is what we'll reap in our old age.
DJ, let me come back to you. In specific terms, this strategy and roadmap on aging and the National Plan of Action on Aging that you've come up with, what exactly are you saying the elderly, the older generation needs to make old age more comfortable, whether in terms of, public facilities, old people's home, for example, like you have mostly in the West, though in this parts, when you take your old ones to the old people's homes, it's like an abandonment. But let's talk about, the specific things that old people need and that must be put, to paper or some kind of act to ensure that these things are in place to protect the aged.
Yeah, thank you for that question. As a matter of fact, the National Senior Citizen Center Act spells it out. And the National Policy on Aging, very comprehensive, spells it. First thing is income security. Income security. Right. And that income security will come for those who are still engaged, how you empower them, for them to continue to earn income. And for those who are very vulnerable, very frail, because you have this category of special needs, how you can now give them social safety nets. So we have been advocating for old age grants. These old age grants are older people. They are not going to exit the social register because this is end of life. And you really have this subpopulation, are really frail, vulnerable, and absolutely poor. So those ones should go on old age grants. Another thing that they now need is health and social care. So what the National Senior Citizens has done, because before now, there was nothing at all, no system at all, no regulatory, no policy, no guidelines concerning long-term care. So you have a situation where older persons, at some point in their lives, having suffered multi-morbidity situations, they now lose their functional capacity. And they cannot even carry on, activities of daily living. So they need care. But before now, there was no skilled care because there was no training and certification. So what the National Senior Citizen has done, working with NBTE, working with as many, in fact, all the stakeholders in the geriatric subsector, we have now identified the geriatric subsector as a subsector. Now, caregiving to older persons have been admitted as a skill. And so now we have worked with MBTE. We have now the national occupational standards for training and certifying caregivers. We have now identified training providers and training centers, and then drafted and validated and now gotten approval for standard operating procedures for care centers and standard operating procedures for even care agencies, because our preferred model is a care agency model, where you accredit care agencies who will now employ the trained and certified caregivers and send care to homes in the rural areas. So we needed to build this system.
Rural areas, very quickly, before we bring in Damilola Grillo. I mean, so far, from your document here, you have 2.5 million older persons captured on the national data system for the poor and the vulnerable. Well, 5.3 million in the urban centers, while 9.5 million actually in the rural areas. I'd like you to address that. How do you ensure that they're not left behind, this 9.5 in the rural areas?
Is that for me?
Yes, for you.
Oh,
please.
for me.
Yes.
Of course. So what we have done, just said today, we met with all the commissioners because they have the purview over older people and they are in the subnational. And then, of course, the local government chairman. So what we are doing is you are seeking that partnership, first and foremost, to build their capacity to understand issues of aging, to build their capacity now to understand programming in aging. Because like I told you before, programming in aging was just seen as token, just give them something and let them go. So it's building that capacity, is sharing the vision and sharing the programming that we have developed, and of course, building their capacity to understand so they can set their own objectives according to the peculiarities of their culture and what
I think that's well. Let me bring in these because we're changing and listening to Emem, she's just told us about the dynamics of our everyday living, to the extent that now in Africa we now have caregivers, and some of these people have already left to be so trained outside the country. So Grillo, help us, talk to us about some of these experts that you are grooming to help actually look after our elderly, and how much of a support are you getting from the government?
I would say there's no support as regards caregiving of our older adults, or I would say maybe there's just about 5%. I know the Lagos State came up with an agency where caregivers are being trained, and then they're sent out to maybe their care homes, the ones owned by the government. But talking about caregiving generally, it came as a result of the recent migration, and everybody wanted to go abroad to do the caregiving work, even though as Africans and as Nigerians, we are not open to having caregivers or open to even placing our older adults in homes. So caregiving is a specialized skill, and it's supposed to be taken as a, a main job or main employment as people are getting into it. caregivers are not domestic staff, like some families think they can do or direct or act or send caregivers, professional caregivers on errands and all of that. Caregivers are professional staff. They're skilled in caring for older adults or nursing older adults, and there are certain requirements that must be passed before you become a professional caregiver. So, for instance, in Nigeria now, quite a number of people are beginning to open their minds to having caregivers for their older parents at home because they are not here, they're abroad, and they reach out to agencies, organizations to deploy caregivers into the homes of their older adults. But one area that is very, very important is the regulation of this market. I will call it a market because quite a number of people are getting into it because they see that there's some business opportunities there. But that shouldn't be the mindset. The first mindset to be a caregiver is the care that you're going to give, the patience that you have, and the ability and resilient spirit that you are going to, render to a total stranger who is not your parent and who is not related to you. So the first skill that a caregiver has to have is actually patience, apart from the required skill set that is needed professionally. So quite a number of organizations, agencies are, saturating into this area of
let me jump in here.
I
apologize to Button because so that we don't lose this. What kind of training? Because we've seen Nigerians who leave our shores go outside, get trained to become certified caregivers. So is that what we do back home here?
So back here, quite a number of people got into it because of how lucrative it became. And then we have people doing caregiving training for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, which is totally wrong. Where I trained, you have to go through almost 6 months of training. Even some have to go to up to a year. But, we Nigerians and the way we do our things, quickly get a certification, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and run through it. And that is why we have a lot of malpractices. You get news of some caregivers abroad being sent to jail and all of that. There is a proper prospectus for caregivers. It's as saying that, okay, you're studying for English at the university level, there is a curriculum for it, and you have to go through that curriculum. You have to go through the theory, you have to go through the practical, and you have to go through the nursing care process of caregiving as well. So as the DJ has said, they're in collaboration with NBTE, where they're going to formalize it and make sure that all the caregivers come together and receive a proper training, receive proper certification that can also be used not only in Nigeria but abroad as well.
Quickly, Madam DG, you have the last word. I mean, after all is said and done, government does its part, local government, state, federal. How do you as an individual prepare for old age? In 30 seconds, if you can.
First and foremost is healthy aging.
Right.
So you have that in mind, so that as you advance in age, in terms of nutrition, then we are talking about everybody. Some are poor, they cannot even afford, they don't have a choice over what they eat. So nutrition helps because there are social determinants of ill health and things like that. So nutrition helps, exercises, and the mindset helps as well. And then engagement. And what really is frightening is when people look at their old age and they feel helpless because they are not really engaged and they're afraid of what the future holds. So it is, that trajectory of life, policy interventions when it's necessary, social protection intervention when it's necessary, and then job opportunities, social connections, and just generally, enjoying life.
I'm happy we're having this conversation. Yeah. We must stay on this and see how it pans out because it's everybody's business. We'd like to thank you for your time, Emem, Omokaro, and Damilola Grillo. Many thanks for speaking with us tonight on Newsnight.